Hello and welcome to Gatecrasher, the podcast that gives you a backstage pass to some of the most iconic events ever staged. I'm your host, super event planner Anna Peters, and today we're going behind the scenes of the most electrifying outdoor event you can ever experience. It's the second biggest street festival in the world, a celebration that encourages cultural unity.
If you walk around the streets of Carnival when it's in full swing, there's not many other events or places where you can go and see so many different people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, religion, essentially just at ease with each other.
Over the years, Notting Hill Carnival has become a mainstay of British culture and even features on a list of the top 100 British icons. Not bad for an event that grew out of a small community gathering. Combining creativity, energy and art with operational, logistical and safety challenges, how is the largest street party in Europe planned? To find out, I spoke with Carnival CEO Matthew Phillip, and we started by talking about how they're getting ready to see all the colour and sounds of Carnival return back to the streets this August, after an enforced break of 3 years.
Well, the preparations are going really well. In fact, as you say, there's been a 3-year gap. We've had 3 years to plan for this. So Carnival takes a lot of different agencies and people to organise, whether it's the 3 local authorities that we operate in, the police, the fire brigade, St John's Ambulance, NHS. And what we agreed in 2020 when we had to make the unfortunate decision of cancelling that we wouldn't down tools, it's now turned out that, we've had 3 years of planning for 2022. Notting Hill Carnival is a huge machine, kind of juggernaut to put together, and any little change that you want to do has a lot of knock-on effect that have to be considered and assessed. So it's actually enabled us to introduce a few things that we were trying to do but we didn't have time to do. Like we've now got a raised platform stage at the judging point for the costumes to go over because they were kind of getting lost in the masses of crowds.
For those who haven't experienced it, perhaps we ought to just put it in context. If you can just tell us a bit about it, the history and traditions, and paint a picture for those that haven't attended or those that perhaps have only seen a glimpse of it on the media.
Carnival started in the mid-60s in the Notting Hill area. At the time, Notting Hill, or Ladbroke Grove as we term it, was a very different place to what it is now. The area's always had a large history of people from different countries immigrating and locating in Notting Hill. At the time, it was more or less a slum. And it was started in 1965-66 by a lady called Ronnie Laslett, who was an Eastern European lady, part Native American, who had a local adventure playground that she had across the road from her house, which was a place for kids to play. There wasn't much for them to do at the time. And she noticed that there were people from so many different walks of life and different countries here, and she wanted to find a way of bringing everybody together. So it wasn't actually started as a carnival as we know it today. It was actually called the September Fair, and it was in the first week in September. Because of the influence of Caribbean people that were in the area at the time, she invited a young Trinidadian group of steel pan players, which included Russell Henderson, Sterling Bettencourt, and a guy called Max Cherry, part of the Russell Henderson trio, the steel band. Because they came from a tradition of carnival in Trinidad, the idea of a parade was very much in them. So they just, spontaneously decided to make a rounds, in their words, which meant walk around the block. And that had a kind of Pied Piper effect of the people that participated in that and wearing fancy dress costumes started to follow. And people came out of their houses as well and started to follow them around. And the idea of a parade in Notting Hill was born then.
So that's where that idea started, was it, that there was going to be movement in the events, and it wouldn't just be in the adventure playground, but people would be walking around the whole area and people would be coming out and joining.
And almost reclaiming the streets. I mean, that tradition started back in Trinidad after the emancipation of slavery. It was the former enslaved people kind of coming out onto the streets streets that they weren't allowed to be on prior to that. They were kind of, coming out onto the streets and celebrating. There's a lot of carnival costume history, and people see some of these things and get the wrong idea. So, for instance, one of the most misconstrued idea is devil masks, where people dress up in blue and have horns. That isn't any form of devil worshipping. What they were doing was pointing a mirror at their former slave masters and saying, "You are the devil. Look at you. Look what you've done for us for hundreds of years," and kind of highlighting that, taking to the streets. That freedom kind of had a lot of resonance with people in the Notting Hill area at the time.
It's one of the reasons why it's important to understand perhaps the history and the context, because you can look at some things and not fully understand the meaning of them. A lot of the costumes, for example, they're incredible costumes with sequins. I mean, they're so glamorous. But also you've got things like dutty masks. Explain some of the costumes and the history of that.
The dutty mask comes from the tradition of Juve, where, they would come out, and originally it was molasses they were putting on themselves and coming out onto the streets in the early hours of the morning. A traditional Juve starts at kind of 4 a.m. until the sun comes up. It's kind of the dawn of Carnival. So that history goes back, and each Caribbean island has its slightly different nuances. For instance, in Grenada, they will use oil, and it would have been literal oil they would be putting on their skins. Some places we use paint. India, for instance, have a thing where they cover themselves in brightly coloured powders and things like that.
You talk about it being on the streets. You grew up around the streets of Notting Hill Carnival. Your father, Clive Phillips, was a veteran. You've been going, haven't you, since a child? How have you seen it change?
It's grown in numbers and popularity. So it's estimated we had 2 million people in 2019. There was a lot less than that when I first started coming and going to Carnival. There wasn't the need for an actual route, so bands and performers would just come out and go almost wherever they want. It had to be organised, and so it could be continue in a safe way. A lot of people kind of lament the loss of that freedom, but it's not a negative thing. Carnival needs to be organised because Notting Hill area invites hundreds of thousands of people to the streets, and it needs to be done in a safe way.
As you say, it's a massive event, isn't it? 2 million people attending, plenty of stakeholders, lots and lots of logistics. So you've now got route planning, security, right down to the details of something like working out how many portaloos might be needed. When do you start that planning? Is it literally the moment one finishes?
So September would be a series of debriefing, looking at what went well for the previous carnival, what didn't go so well, and how we can address that. And then literally from October, November, it's planning. If we're implementing any changes, they need to be done very early. And the planning, is very much a 12 months of the year. So it's like 10 and a half months of planning and 1.5 months of debriefing from the previous carnival. So it's 12 months of the year.
Carnival is different to many other events for lots and lots of reasons, but because it's by the community, for the community. So it's supported by organisations such as the Carnival Village Trust that you're CEO of. How does that model work, with lots of people volunteering to organise various things, but then presumably you've got something like the Trust supporting and taking that helicopter view, is that right?
The helicopter view and the planning is very much done by Notting Hill Carnival. So Carnival Village Trust is an organisation that we set up 12 years ago to develop and promote the arts of Carnival. When we took over organising the event itself, Notting Hill Carnival, we felt it was important that the communities that put on Carnival had their voices. So a separate company was set up, which is Notting Hill Carnival Limited, which is solely responsible for the organising of Notting Hill Carnival. And that has an advisory council, which is made up of pioneers of Carnival, people involved in the various disciplines of Carnival, whether it's sound system, steel pan, masquerade, calypso and soca. And then there's a board of directors, which has similar representation from the groups that I said. One of the things that had been lacking prior to 2018 when we took over was actually a community voice. So we have community representation on the advisory council and the board as well. That vehicle is what's used to organise the 2 days of Carnival. It's one big event, but really it's hundreds of small events that kind of tied together. So there's 38 licenses for static sound systems. Those licenses are actually held by the operators of those sound systems. And then we have 2 large stages in Carnival which have separate licenses. And the parade itself is actually not really a licensable activity, but that's done through the permissions of 3 local authorities, which is the Royal Borough of Kensington Chelsea, Westminster Council and Brent Council.
But how are you working with the local community to minimise disruption over the 2 days?
The route itself is just under 4 miles long, and the footprint is mainly within that kind of circular route, and it kind of spills out slightly out of that. In terms of community engagement, we have an open door policy. If residents or businesses have any issues or concerns, they're able to come into the office and speak openly, and we do our best to try and address their concerns. An event the scale of Notting Hill Carnival, there is always going to be issues, and you fix something and sometimes it might push an issue in another direction. For the scale of the event, we have very few issues across the board, actually.
Yeah, I read that it's the same number of issues, I think, that Glastonbury gets, but there's a different perception, isn't there, unfortunately? Is that a case of frustration, the way the media sometimes focuses on that?
Very much so. In 2018, we had a clear kind of vision what we wanted to do with the event, and an event like Notting Hill Carnival, like you say, it takes a lot of volunteers and people, put a lot of work into it for little return. And we wanted to find ways of getting sponsorship without over-commercialising the event. But we didn't actually go out seeking sponsorship. We just focused on changing the media narrative. And we found that we were quickly able to do that.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, Matthew, was creative direction. You don't have an artistic director. I think I'm right on that. Do people have freedom to do what they want within the carnival?
The key word there you said is freedom. So we don't have an artistic director. We have hundreds. Every mass band leader, every sound system operator, still band organiser, etc. They have the freedom to come up with their own themes and costumes, decide what music they play. And I think that is what made Carnival so popular. It allows it to kind of ebb and flow in an organic way. And that's why kind of every carnival, although they're similar, no carnival is the same. The designers have that freedom. They're able to change with what they feel is correct to do at the time.
So over the 2 days, what's actually happening? How does it look for the people that are working there? What time do they arrive on site? Presumably the day before you're going in and putting things like the barriers down.
Yeah, so the barriers go in on the Saturday. We also have an event on the Saturday, which is Panorama, the steel band competition. And that's in Horniman's Park, which is also a stage over the 2 days of Carnival. So that's an event that has 5,000 people. While that event is going on, the infrastructure is being built around the judging zone and barriers. There aren't that many barriers at Carnival anymore because actually barriers present risk. So we try and manage it with stewards. So if we need to put a barrier in, we would put in a line of stewards.
So you've got the smaller event happening on the Saturday. What else is different across the 2 days? You've got a family event, haven't you, on one of the days?
So Sunday is Children's Day, although there are adult elements. Earlier on you mentioned Dutty Mass. We have 11 Dutty Mass bands at Carnival on Sunday, but the rest of the day is steel bands and the children's costume bands. That's the Sunday, and then the Monday is the Adults Day. The sound systems appear on both days as well, and the sound systems, a lot of them will have young performers as well taking part and performing.
Do those performers, do they come to you and asked to go on, be part of Carnival? Do you go out and look for new talent?
We don't go out and look for new talent. We get contacted a lot by performers, and we will always link them up with the various sound systems. We encourage people to go onto our website and they can find a sound that most fits the type of music that they would want to do. We have 2 stages. The large stage is normally activated by a brand or something, and they will bring in performers. Then we have the Paris Square stage, which is the local calypso and soca artists, and we have some young performers from the area and wider in London performing on that stage.
In 2020, the live event was cancelled and you created the first digital edition. What were the challenges of trying to get the atmosphere of Carnival into a digital event? And will there be things that you'll still retain of virtual going forward to help you reach a wider audience?
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't create the atmosphere of Carnival, but what we focused on was highlighting Carnival arts. Carnival's a multi-sensory thing, so a big thing is the food and smell. So we did things like cooking lessons so people could learn how to make their own jerk chicken at home, cocktail making, as well as interviews of the pioneers of Carnival and the designers and musicians, so people could hear the music but also get an understanding of the different bands, why people do Carnival, the history of the band within Carnival, and we used it as an opportunity to kind of educate people, really. We also had, live music stages in Nigeria, Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, Grenada. Ultimately, the deep roots of Notting Hill Carnival go back to Trinidad and prior to that, ultimately Africa.
Part of the original event was to promote integration and cultural exchange. How does Carnival have a role at the moment promoting tolerance in our society and capturing the diversity of London?
If you walk around the streets of Carnival when it's in full swing, there's not many other events or places where you can go and see so many different people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, religion, essentially just at ease with each other, smiling and enjoying themselves, whether they're dancing, eating food or just strolling around. And I think just that in itself, when young people see that, it's kind of unique, Ultimately, it's a celebration of black culture, but it embraces everybody and everybody can get involved.
As we've been hearing, Carnival is designed to be larger than life, built to be extraordinary. And if you'd like to hear more stories behind extraordinary events, then don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And if you'd like to, also leave us a review, as it really helps others find it. Coming up, Matthew and I talk about the importance of Carnival and the role it plays in bringing people together, as well as how it's perceived. It's a hallmark event, isn't it? It delivers huge financial value to London, brings tourism to the UK. Do you think Carnival arts get enough support and are celebrated enough?
Absolutely not, and it's something that we work hard on all the time. We want to find ways of getting more investment into Carnival. A couple of years ago, we started the Carnival Development Fund. Through fundraising and donations, we're hoping to support its development into the future. Ultimately, for what it gives back to not just London's economy, just people's well-being and sense of self. It gives so much. And it would be amazing if we could get more support to develop that further.
And is it also about getting the right kind of support? There must be huge potential to commercialise it. I imagine there are big brands knocking on the door all the time wanting to get involved, but I suppose you have to balance that with also keeping it authentic. It must be a difficult equation to get right.
Although we want finance, we don't want to over-commercialise it, so we will work with brands and organisations that want to integrate with us, but there's a global brand that's going to be involved this year. It's really being done in a meaningful way. They're actually helping us celebrate the heritage and history of Carnival. Ultimately, these brands have a product to sell. In their words, they didn't want to come and do a land grab, which is exactly how we feel. We're not going to allow anybody to come and do a land grab. If people want to get involved and integrate into the festival, we're happy to work with them. But we don't want to see Carnival just a space with advertisements everywhere.
Carnival 2022, it's obviously going to be emotionally charged this year as you return back to the streets. How will you feel when it's underway, Matthew? And are you out enjoying it, or are you just working flat out?
We have the Carnival control room, which is the event liaison team, and we'll be there with all of the partners, the local authorities, the police, the fire brigade, St John's Ambulance, NHS, our stewards, health and safety company, just overseeing and looking at Carnival. When it comes to Carnival and the management of the route and the crowds on the day, we're looking into the future. So when we're looking at the street at 3 o'clock, we're not thinking about what's happening at 3 o'clock. We're thinking about what's happening at 4 and 5 o'clock and what's going to come then. We've got to be kind of one step ahead all the time.
Do you think that this year will be a big year? I assume people have missed it enormously and want to get back and experience the joy of it again.
Absolutely. There's a lot of pent-up emotions. People want to celebrate and come together. So I think this year is going to be a very important one. And I think there'll be a lot of people celebrating, come rain or shine.
So we've established that your role's pretty full on, Matthew. But if you had some free time, is there an event that you yourself would love to gatecrash? And if so, why?
I think one of the events I've been years ago, and actually will be this year, will be Glastonbury. I'm looking forward to being at an event where I'm not responsible. Although I'm responsible to an extent because we're taking 60 people. We're taking the floats, a steel band, people in costume, but not having that overall responsibility and just to be able to just relax. And I actually look forward to the future when I kind of retire and can come to Carnival and just not have that worry and can just enjoy it.
So when you've retired and you don't have that responsibility, where would be the best place? Where would we find you?
The best place to experience Carnival is either listening to music at a sound system or enjoying your favourite artists on the stage, but getting involved in a band, wearing a costume, being free for those couple of days. The experience on the parade, being within the parade, is very different to standing on the side and spectating. So I'll be in a band in costume or maybe playing in a steel band.
In the thick of it, one way or another. Thank you, Matthew, for today. I know how busy you are, especially as we're creeping now finally nearer and nearer to that August date. So good luck with everything. We can't wait to see Carnival back on the streets where it belongs.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Notting Hill Carnival is so much more than a street party. As Matthew explained, it was born out of a desire to bring people together. Community is everything for this event, and at the heart of it, Carnival is a celebration of history, culture and diversity. It's a powerful demonstration of the ability of events to connect people and how to pass on knowledge and traditions to upcoming generations. Over the years, it's evolved from a small community event into one of the largest annual arts events in the world, and it tells us an important lesson in not underestimating the power of smaller events to build community. At the moment, we're seeing a rise in the number of smaller events that have been hosted as they offer a great opportunity for people to come together in a meaningful way. And as we move out of the pandemic into an endemic, possibly, the way we host events has changed. It was interesting to hear Matthew talk about how they acknowledged that digital just wouldn't cut it when it came to reproducing the atmosphere of their live event. So instead, they looked at how they could use digital to deepen people's understanding of Carnival. Something to think about if you plan hybrid events, as a virtual audience needs a different approach if you're going to connect. One of my key takeaways from today was that you can't control everything that happens at an event, but you can be prepared for every scenario. Planning is everything. Matthew spoke about the need to be one step ahead all the time and just how much work that required. 10.5 months of planning and 1.5 months of debriefing, all for a 2-day event. It's a lot, but it's worth it because when you get it right and connect people, well, that's what makes events great. Thanks for listening today. Personally, I'm amazed Glastonbury hasn't come up earlier as a dream event to gatecrash. Would it be top of your list too? I'd love to keep the conversation going. So come and find me on social media at Evolve Events and let me know what event you'd love to gatecrash and why. See you next week for another iconic event, and in the meantime, it would be so appreciated if you could leave a review. It really does help others find the podcast and discover just how amazing the events industry is.